which doesn't mean much to people that aren't technical or builders, but what it should mean to everybody that cares about money is that that's a, could be a $10,000 to $30,000 cost savings. So there's a lot of great opportunity there. Again, you have to really go into your local planning and zoning office and figure out what your options are for. Some people can take a single property, they can split it with SB9. Supposedly on paper, they can do 3 units on each. You basically take a single family house and you turn it into 6 or 9 units. So there's some incredible strategies out there to really lever up your land as we increase densities.
Hi everybody, Jose Luis Morales here. Welcome back to another episode of the Morales Group Show. Today we have Dereck Sherrel. He is a real estate investor, ADU specialist, and today he is going to be teaching us how to build an ADU and how to make it affordable. Welcome to the show, Dereck. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm doing awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Good. I am super excited to have you on the show just because I know a lot of our viewers are asking us questions about ADUs. So we wanted to do an all-inclusive video as to how to build an ADU, everything from what the law is, requirements, costs, grants, junior ADU. So for our viewers, you want to watch this one through because Dereck has a lot of expertise, so you want to make sure to watch it till the end. So for our viewers, Dereck, who don't know who you are, who is Dereck Sherrel, and how did you get involved in this wonderful world of ADUs and real estate investing?
Oh, awesome question. So I'm just a normal guy that's had a super simple, repeatable, average strategy, and over time, it's yielded extraordinary results. So I started building ADUs only because I lived in Oregon where they were legislatively allowable. I worked on my first ADU project in 1996 as a high school student. We built an illegal, unpermitted ADU for another one of our high school teachers. After that, I started an apprenticeship in construction at 16. I got my license as a contractor at 19. And I built accessory dwelling units for years for clients before it occurred to me that I could deploy this strategy myself. Kind of accidentally got into investing by buying my first home in 2002. And I've been a build and hold long-term investor exclusively with the ADU strategy since 2002. I participated in hundreds of ADU builds and done several thousand ADU consultations across the country. So now ADUs pay my way. I'm a retired fireman, and I talk to legislators, developers, builders, homeowners, DIYers all over the country every day on how to deploy the affordable ADU strategy. And I focus on planning, designing, building, holding, and managing these units. So pretty much anything ADU from ground up build to how to get a good tenant is fair game today.
I love it. So let's get started. Let's say that I wanted to buy a property with the potential for an ADU and a junior ADU. What would I look for? And what would the difference be if I just wanted to buy a house with a potential for an ADU?
Yeah, wonderful. So everything that I'm looking at buying and I'm advising my clients to buy needs to already have either an ADU that's attached. That's the hardest one to get. So in California, if you're going to deploy this strategy and turn a single family house for all intents and purposes into a triplex, you want to look for property that already has something within the existing footprint that you can convert into a legal 500 square foot JADU. And I would also be looking for that same property to have room in the back or side or front yard where you could deploy the detached ADU. Ideally, that property is going to have some kind of like unfinished basement. It's going to have a flat, larger lot. It's going to have alley access. In California, for your viewers, any single family lot is going to allow this strategy. If you don't live in California, it's super, super, super important that you become an expert in your local planning and zoning code. So if you're shopping in, say, Little Rock, Arkansas, you want to call the planning and zoning department and ask them specifically in which zones within your city can I deploy this strategy. Again, for California, the hardest one to do is the attached ADU. So I'd be looking specifically for properties that already have some type of space within the perimeter of the house. That could include a garage that can be converted into that JADU, and don't use your ADU permit until you can build detached. I will also say in this same breath that one of the best strategies right now in this market to get into ADUs is to buy a property that already has one, especially if you're in a market where they're historically undervalued through bad appraisals. One of the arguments I get a lot
Mhm.
is, well, Dereck, I don't want to build an ADU because it's going to cost me 200 and I'm only going to get $100,000 value out of my appraisal, and I'm not going to be able to burr all my money back out. And I tell them, like, a house with an ADU should be at the very top of your buy list because they're obviously grossly undervalued. So I'd be looking for a property that already has an ADU, potentially, or already has a space that could be easily converted to that attached ADU. Or one of my other favorite strategies is to be looking for a house that has an illegal ADU in an area that now allows them. So 70% of all ADUs in our country are what we call legacy or unpermitted ADUs. But if you're able to buy a property that has an unpermitted ADU in California, and you can get it permitted because it was built to code or close to code, there's a good opportunity for a seller credit there. Because what realtors are doing, and I don't want to pick on realtors here, but what happens is they kind of go list these places, they market them, they price them, and they sell them as house with ADU, only to find out that when the client buys the house and goes into the city to pull a rental permit, they find out that they don't have an ADU. They have an illegal existing use where somebody had converted a detached garage and not pulled the permits. So we actually seek those out, look for properties with illegal ADUs. We go back to the seller and say, hey, this actually isn't an ADU, it's an illegal non-conforming use. It's going to cost $20,000 to $30,000 to pay impact fees and do a little bit of touch-up work to get this to be able to pass inspection. And you know what? Can you give us a credit for that? So that's another good strategy for that question set. Thank you.
And is there a certain amount of square footage that you should be looking for, like for converting existing space in your home into in a junior ADU? And is there, I know that you said enough room in the back to potentially build a detached one. When we say enough room, like, is there something like more specific, like we typically like to see over X amount of lot, or we typically like to see X amount of space in the back to be able to build?
Yeah, great question. So as far as the interior square footage requirement, this is California only. A JADU is capped at 500 square feet. You can add up to,
Mm.
I believe it's 160 additional square feet for ingress and egress. But realistically, if you're in California and you're looking for that specific JADU, you're looking to stay under 500 square feet. But if you have an over-under house that has an unfinished basement that's 800, it's not off your list. You're just going to have to make 300 square foot of that downstairs into some kind of mechanical room. So it's not what we call gross habitable living space to stay under that 500. If you're not a listener right now and you're not in California, you'll revert back to the ADU code in your city, because ADUs, either attached or detached, are usually capped. They're always going to be smaller than the primary residence. That's kind of the rule, is they're accessory to the primary. And most codes cap them at, say, 800 or 1,000, some as high as 1,200 square feet. A lot of times there'll be language 800 square feet or 75% of the primary, whichever is smaller. So if you're outside of California and you want to do an attached ADU, it's not going to be capped at 500. You just have to look at your code. The second part of your question that relates to square footage and size, there's some folks that'll say look for lots above 5,000 square feet, or only look in these zones where there's quarter acre lots. And I disagree with that. I say what I always say: fall back onto becoming an expert in your market's zoning code. So if in your zoning code you need to have 5-foot side setback and 10-foot rear setback, and most international codes say you can't build a detached dwelling closer than 6 feet for fire reasons. So I just tell folks, go 6 feet off the primary house, and if you can go 30 feet in 2 directions, you have room for an ADU. And I've seen people put detached ADUs that met side, rear, and front setback requirements on lots that were 3,000 square feet. So a simpler way to dumb that down even more is to go in your backyard and see if you can take 20 steps in 2 different directions. And if you do, you probably have room.
I love it. That makes it pretty nice and simple. Now, are there requirements? So, like, I've gotten mixed feedback. Like, so we're doing uh, a a junior ADU and a detached ADU on a property in Thousand Oaks, and then we try to do the same thing in a different city, and the different city said that we couldn't do the junior ADU unless we were occupying the primary residence. So like as investors that we couldn't do it. Is there any light that you can shed on that? Like is that like an additional overlay from the city specifically, or is that something that is actually part of the California code that we would need to abide by?
Wonderful question. And I'm going to keep saying this, and you can edit it out if you want, but you have to become an expert in the market you're investing in's planning and zoning code, because what happens is there's subjectivity in this. There's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be a clear and objective standards. The state legislators have come down and said, cities and counties, you've done a horrible job in California managing infill housing. We're going to tie your hands, and this is the standard. So you're going to have to allow 2 ADUs. One of them can be a JADU up to 500 square feet. It can't be used as a short-term rental, and there is an owner occupancy requirement. How some cities have interpreted that is a little bit different. If anybody's ever done much development and had the opportunity to build relationships in planning and building departments, you understand that different people will tell you different things on different days. Sometimes the same person will tell you something different in the same day. So what I would
Mhm.
suggest is that you ask your local planning and zoning office for the clear and objective standards on if you can or cannot require me to live in this house and rent it out. So as far as the residency requirement on JADUs, the way I understand the legislation was to be implemented was the attached JADU was for owner occupants. There's a couple of strategies to get around that. One of them would be to not put a stove in that JADU, and you would just have a master lease and a roommate. Because when you pull that stove out, you don't have a standalone kitchen, therefore it's not a dwelling. So there's some strategies to get around it, but specifically ask your local planning and zoning office in writing if you have to meet that residency requirement or not. My interpretation is you do, but if you have one city that doesn't say you have to do that, they don't put a deed restriction on you, they don't tell you they need a notarized document saying that you will only rent that if you live there, just carry on as normal. We have to remember that the intent of this legislation, not only in California, but in many other states that are following suit, is to provide needed infill housing that's more affordable because the infrastructure is already there. They encourage investors to build these. I mean, investors and developers are going to be they're going to be the primary drivers of these. Obviously, small homeowners, we want them to do them as well, but they don't have as much money and as much knowledge as investors and developers do. So to combat that, if you have one city where they allowed you and you're trying to deploy this in another city and they say only if you live there, I would say that you go to a local planning commission meeting, you go to a local city council meeting, and you ask to speak on a non-agenda item, and you just ask the policymakers, hey, what is your interpretation of this? This is what we think benefits our city. This is what we think will provide more needed infill housing units for our workforce. They're more affordable than other units because they're smaller, and go from there. But to circle back and really answer your question, it's every specific municipality is going to interpret that state law a little bit differently. You can also call the Casita Coalition in California. If you need some backup, a lot of their services are free. So California residents that feel like they're getting pushed back or unfair treatment from their city or county, call the Casita Coalition in California.
And what is the Casita Coalition, basically?
They're basically a trade group that does a lot of lobbying and support and legislative action work for people to be able to provide more infill housing with ADUs. So they would be somebody that could support you if the city isn't following state law.
Great. Now, just a little tip for some of our viewers, like this law is for single family residences. Now, it also applies for multi-units as well too, right? And for multi-units, it's a little bit more favorable, right?
Yeah, there's some really favorable situations that you can potentially meet with some of the SB9 rules as far as fee simple lot partitioning. You don't have to use separate sewer lines, which is a really big deal. You're one of the few states in the country that allows you to use what's called common sewer, which is where you would actually split off a different tax lot of record, but still have that tied in to the primary sewer lateral of the main house that you started with, which doesn't mean much to people that aren't technical or builders, but what it should mean to everybody that cares about money is that that's a, could be a $10,000 to $30,000 cost savings. So there's a lot of great opportunity there. Again, you have to really go into your local planning and zoning office and figure out what your options are for. I mean, some people can take a single property, they can split it with SB9. Supposedly on paper, they can do 3 units on each. You basically take a single family house and you turn it into 6 or 9 units. So there's some incredible strategies out there to really lever up your land as we increase densities. Not a lot of people have done them. This is so new that they're still trying to interpret the legislation in each of these cities. So if you're interested in doing that, I would go to a local real estate meetup. I would go to your local planning and zoning office and start asking who in this town has done this, and then go talk to that person. See if you can add some value to them and ask them what their process is, because nobody can really give a clear answer on that. The
Yeah.
other thing I would say, and this is a really good tip in this light, is if you go to your local planning and zoning office and you say, hey, I have this half-acre piece in the city limits. I was thinking about doing a JADU, but I understand that maybe I could get higher densities. What would you do if this was your property? And if you empower the planning officials, and you respect their education, and they really are the smartest person in the room, and you ask them, hey, I want to build as much housing as I can on this lot. What would you do if this was yours? And a lot of times what I've found is they take you under their wing and they show you exactly what you can do to maximize density, which for us is more units and therefore more needed housing. So always ask your local decision makers what they would do.
Yeah. I have a 25 unit apartment that I own, Derek. And I think that there's
Mhm.
a section in it where you can build 25% of the existing units in additional ADUs. So I'm actually in the permit process, already approved for 6 additional units as part of that 25 unit complex. So I bought it as a 25 unit complex. I underwrote it as a 25 unit complex. And now I'm able to add 6 additional units. So now we're doing like this huge value add. Not only that, but like the unit
Amazing.
mix that they're allowing us to do is like unbelievable. What I did want to ask you is, so here's something that I've noticed, because I get questions about ADUs as well too. And sometimes when people go to the city themselves, or people try to ask the city, sometimes maybe they're not asking the right questions, or they get a different person. And I've heard so many stories of people being told that they can't do a certain something, and maybe they're not asking the right questions. Would you recommend that somebody hire an architect from the beginner? Would you recommend that they deal with this directly? What would you recommend in those types of cases? And if you would recommend the architect route, like how would somebody go to find a good architect? Because we went the architect route, but what ended up happening is the first 2 architects weren't really specialists and they were horrible. The third architect that we have now is actually really, really good, understands the process, and is fast as well too. So any tips as it relates to do it on your own? Is it easy enough where you can do it on your own? Should they hire somebody? What would you recommend? And if they do hire somebody, what any idea what that would cost as well too?
Yeah, wonderful question. So there's 2 paths here. There's an easy path that's hard, and there's a simple path that's expensive. If you can afford it and you have a good job in tech and you don't want to bang your head against the wall, go hire either an architect or a land use planner. Either the architect or the land use planner, I would always call the city in which I'm trying to develop and say, hey, who's a good land use planner that you use? Who's an architect that you use and respect and would recommend? And a lot of times they'll give you a list. If you have the money and you can afford it, I would go into your market and I would find somebody just like you, somebody who's doing what I want to do, and I would go ask them if I could use some of their contacts. So you're looking for somebody in that market that's already done what you're trying to do. So if you live in San Francisco, California, and you want to build a 25% density into some multifamily you have, I would drive around that town until I found somebody that's doing it and ask them what architect or land use planner they used. So that's how I would do it. I would look firsthand myself. I would ask at real estate meetups. I would blast it out on my Facebook real estate group. I would call around. If I couldn't afford it, and I couldn't use a professional land use planner or architect who is doing a job that I want to do in the same area. That's really important. You can't just hire an architect, like you said. You have to hire an architect that specializes in your little market, that has the relationships that you don't. A good architect in your market has the cell phone number of the planning director, and they can just call them and ask them something in the middle of the day because they have that relationship. You're probably not going to have that as an individual person. So the second piece of this is if you have more time than money and you want to do it yourself, the same rules are going to apply. A lot of times you can just pay for consultation. You don't have to pay for somebody, you have to pay $5,000 for them to go through the whole process, but you can pay them maybe $250 an hour to tell you exactly what steps you have to jump through. And then the last piece of that is pretty much every city, again, is going to have a clear and objective standard. So if you're going to take it on yourself because you have more time than money, say you paid $250 and you talked to an architect and he told you or she told you what to do, call the city. Understand that they're going to be busy. It might take them a little longer to get back to you than it would take to get back to the professional because you don't have the relationship yet. But you're going to get a checklist of some sort from the city on how you meet the clear and objective standards. Or they might just say, go read section 105-62E, and you just go follow those directions and read that, and you can completely do it yourself. The benefit of doing the DIY route is if you want to be a small infill developer, like I have become slowly over time, is the next time you do it, you're going to know how to do it. And you're not going to have to pay these exorbitant fees from these other professionals that are busy. You can go do it yourself. So even you hiring somebody to go convert another 25% off your 25 unit, if you look at that whole application and you want to go do it next year and you decided you wanted to take it on, you could probably do it yourself. But it always comes back to, can you afford to pay a professional? If so, always pay them. If you want to learn or you have more time than money, do it yourself by getting professional consultation and then go right to the source, which is the city planning and zoning office, and ask for their directions. It is their job. They forget to remind us this, but it's their job. They're paid on a tax basis to help us develop. So whether they make you feel important or they make you feel like, hey, go away, boy, you're bothering me, their job is to help you create density in the city. That's why they're there.
Now, any rules of thumb as to like what a good architect would charge to like for just fees? And then are you aware of any grants for owner users? Like meaning if you live in your property, are there any grants that you're aware of that would potentially help somebody offset a lot of those architect fees and permitting fees as well too? And then lastly, before I
Yeah.
forget, is how long should that process take, like from the time that you submit plans to the time that the permits are approved?
Yeah, three in one there. I'll try to unpack that trifecta. So first, a good architect is going to be around $250 an hour nationally. I would say that a single detached backyard ADU, we'll just use that as an example, is going to be $3,000 to $5,000, and that's going to include plot plan, that's
That's
going to include engineered drawings, that's going to include the dealings with the city to basically get the permits pushed through, and they should call you at the end of that $3,000 to $5,000 and say, hey, go pay city X $2,000 for your plan review and permit fees and pick them up. They're ready. So $3,000 to $5,000 is kind of an estimate for one unit. If that's an attached JADU, it's almost harder because they actually have to come into your house and they have to measure things that are already there. Whereas if it's a new standalone unit, they can use files. They can copy and paste from files they have. They don't have to specifically map out and design your own house. Most plans are going to need to see what's existing and what's proposed. So that's kind of a rough estimate. I will say, and I'm going to slip this in right here, even though it wasn't part of the question, many progressive cities in California and other cities in the country have this amazing product that's called a free set of pre-approved, pre-engineered plans. So if you're looking at, for example, for argument here, a detached backyard ADU, before you go pay $3,000 to $5,000 to a local architect, ask your city, hey, do you have a set of free pre-approved plans? A lot of cities will say, yes, we have 3 of them. Here's the link. Look at those 3. They'll have a studio, a 1-bedroom, and a 2-bedroom a lot of times. And if you're okay with the architectural design of one of them and the footprint actually fits in your buildable area in your yard, you can use those for free. So you're saving $3,000 to $5,000, but more importantly, you're saving time. And I call it 1 to 6 months. So the other piece of your question is, how long does it take? I tell folks for 180U, plan for a year. It's going to take 3 months of planning. It's going to take 3 months to get permitted, and then it's going to take about 6 months to build. So with that being said, I can build ADUs in my market in 90 days, and that's from permits to certificate of occupancy, handing over the keys. I've also seen people spend 5 years to build an ADU. I was hearing stories in Southern California of 8-month plan reviews during COVID. So it's going to depend on your market. Again, what I would do is I would go to a local real estate meetup. I would call people like you or I would go find somebody that's done what you want to do in the area that you want to do it in and ask them how long it took. But in general, it's going to take about 3 months to get through a planning office. I just did some work for somebody down in just outside of Fresno, Clovis, California, and they literally had their plans approved in 1 day. 1 day. They took them in. The next day they called them and said, hey, these are approved. Come pay us and pick them up. So those are general statements, but I'll tell you one thing, this is a construction rule and I promise it works every time. No matter what you convert, build, or develop, it's going to take longer and cost more.
That's funny. Now, I hear that the law has like a timeline that they have to approve the permits in, but for the most part, I don't see that most cities comply within that timeline. What is the timeline, and what can you do if like the city is taking longer than that timeline? Because I believe that the law says that if they're not approved within this time period, it's deemed approved. Yet I've got certain permits that have been a lot longer than that. And I guess my question would be like, have you actually seen anybody enforce that, or any tips there?
This is probably one of the best interviews I can remember. You're asking like all the best questions, man. I'm gonna have to dig deep for these ones. So that's a wonderful one. There's some state laws around the country. 90 days, they have to rule 180 days on type 2 or type 3 applications. So there's all these rules, these kind of flow chart benchmarks to make sure that it's not the good old boy system where your plan just gets stuck in the cycle
Yeah.
if they don't like you. Unfortunately, that still happens. So let's just say there's a 180-day rule where they have to issue your permits or it's deemed approved. What they end up doing is, and this is not maliciously, it's just how the business works because they're doing more with less and they're stretched thin a lot of times. And the bureaucracy is really, really thick, is they say this is an incomplete application and we need to see the setback from this tree to the property line. They can always ask you for another piece of information which deems that application incomplete, which therefore starts over the timeline. So there's tricks in the industry for them to delay that. Obviously, they want to get it off their plate. They want to get your stuff back to you as soon as they can. So those timelines don't always hold water. And when you ask, how do you enforce that? If you're in a market where they're supposed to give you permits within 90 days and they don't, and it's been 6 months, you could call a land use attorney, you could call the Casita
Mhm.
Coalition if you're in California. But really, you don't want to go use your teeth. You want to use honey. You want to go down into the planning and zoning office, maybe once a week. I like to call, email, and show up in person. They all know my name because I'm in there all the time. That's what you want. Even if you're in a huge municipality and there's 60 assistant planners, if you go in there every week and just say, hey, it's been 100 days and your code right here in section 107 says that you have to approve or deny these within 90. Is there anything I can do? Is there anything that's missing? How can we speed this up? How can I help? And if you go in there and you build a relationship and you care about people, like you're going to get better service. So as far as like, is there any like punitive action? Not really. Just try to go in there with a good attitude. Understand they're busy. Understand their kid was probably sick last week. Like everybody's doing the best they can at life, including the people that are dragging their feet on your plan review. So I always just say build the relationship.
That's awesome. And then, so we talked about the fees for the architect. What are some of the other fees that are associated with like permit fees, like impact fees, school fees, permit fees? Like any rules of thumb there, or what should somebody expect?
Yeah, it just is going to depend on your area. Like if you're in California, I know they're waiving a lot of impact fees. 3 questions ago, you asked about costs and if there was any money available via grant. California has this awesome program with one of their state groups that offered a $40,000 grant that could go towards these specific sets, which could be engineering, could be underground, could be utility work. To my knowledge, that $40,000 dried up really quick, but the legislator via the voters is asking for a bunch more money. So there's a couple processes where you can kind of get in line for the next round of that 40K money. But the costs, that other costs that are associated are going to depend on your area. So like in California, if it's below a certain size, I want to say anything under 800 square feet, they waive $799 maybe. Don't quote me if you're a Californian expert on planning and zoning. I do a lot of different things in a
Mhm.
lot of states, but I think it's that. There's a cap size. If your ADU is under this, we waive impact fees, which could be incredible because whenever you build something new, what happens is the jurisdiction having authority there, they're going to want a percentage of that overall cost for maintenance and roads. So you'll have like a roads fee, you'll have a water department fee, you'll probably have a schools fee. You could have some kind of impact fee for stormwater. So there's all these different fees based on the area that you're building in and the size of your ADU. And they add up quick. I call them pay to play fees. I mean, in my state, we have to pay those. And
Mhm.
the system development fees or impact fees or pay to play fees, from my
Mhm.
experience, have been anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000. So those are fees. That's not like paying your engineer. It's not paying your architect. It's not paying the city to plan review. That's just your fees to be able to add another dwelling within your city. And people need to understand that that is because there's more traffic on that road. There's more kids swinging on the swing. You're literally adding to the wear and tear, if you will, on a community. So you have to pay your way to play into that. But if you're in
So,
California and you can stay under that cap, that's a great reason to build a smaller ADU, is because you could save, say, $20,000 right out of the gate.
yeah, yeah, which would be good. Okay, so let's say that somebody has gone through the process of getting their permits approved. Now what?
Well, you're going to have two choices. Again, there's the hard way that takes a lot of your time, or there's the easy way that costs a lot of money. So which one do you pick? I teach the hybrid model. I teach people, whether you're an investor or a builder or a banker or a school teacher, you're probably a decent manager. If you're listening to this channel and you want to build a house in your backyard, you're probably a decent manager. You could potentially be your own general contractor. In a lot of states, as long as it's your primary residence, they will let you. If this is strictly an investment property, some of these rules don't apply. You're not going to be eligible for the $40,000 grant. You're probably not going to be able to do the JADU. You're probably not going to be able to build it yourself. So you either build it yourself by self-managing, and that's a whole nother show. But most people I tell to find a contractor that you know, like, and trust, or somebody you know, like, and trust, know, likes, and trusts. The best ways to find a good ADU contractor in your area are, one would be through referrals, two would be through your local real estate meetup. Go to meetings where other people are building ADUs in your area and ask who they use and if
Mhm.
they were happy with them. And then my all-time favorite way to find a good contractor is to go to, and this is very specific, go to the closest professional lumber yard to the site where you're going to build. That's not Home Depot, that's not Lowe's, that's not a lumber yard one city over. Go to the closest lumber yard near the project where you want to build and go to the counter and say, who's been paying their bill here consistently for 10 years or more? Who has integrity, and who would you hire to build an ADU at your property? So those are kind of my tips to find a good general. And then no matter which one of those buckets you pull the general contractor, I want to interview he, she, or they personally, and I want to ask them for 3 references. So not only am I going to want to know, like, and trust who I'm going to hire, I want to get references from that contractor. So if a contractor in this market does not have 3 references where they'll give you a name and address and a phone number, like, something is drastically wrong. So I'm looking for a contractor that's built an ADU in my market. I'm going to call him or her. I'm going to ask for a few references, and you'll know in the first reference call, hey, how was Jill's home construction? How'd the ADU go? And they'll say, oh, she was amazing. She was on time, cost a little bit more, but she was really clear about the price hikes. I would recommend her strongly. And you'll know right then and there that you have a good builder. But don't hire somebody who's not built an ADU in your area. That's
Okay,
what I
so
would
that's the
recommend.
main criteria, basically, hiring somebody with experience in building ADUs, basically. Any other questions that
Yes,
you would
yeah,
ask
just
them besides that?
I would ask them, do they have any personal relationships with the planning and zoning and the local building department? So a good builder in your market that specifically does what you're going to do is going to have the building official and the inspectors in their cell phone. They're going to know the decision makers, and they're going to be able to call. It's those relationships that we're leveraging. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for relationships. And I always say price is less important than yield. So don't look at how expensive your contractor is. Look at what is the overall cost of the project and what is going to be the return on that. So many people want to find the cheapest contractor, and what they end up with is they end up with this contractor who isn't experienced in their market, who doesn't have relationships with the inspectors, who isn't able to pass and deliver on time, who's not, going to be able to stay on budget. So you end up paying more. You get what you pay for.
I agree 100% on that. Even with one of our projects, we ended up trying to subcontract it out. It was a nightmare for me. Like I hired a contractor and now it's going to be done within the next 30 days. A lot better, a lot faster, a lot more within budget. But I thought I was going to save a little bit of money, how one of my friends says, but didn't work out that way. What I did want to ask you is, uh
Oh, I was just going to back up 1 second because your question was like, you have your permits, now what? And in most cases, I recommend that people, if they're going to hire a contractor, you want to bring the contractor on board when you're in the design phase. And ideally, you want the contractor to be the one that designed it. So you don't always need an architect to draw your house. A lot of times, contractors are draftsmen or draftswomen. So if you have your contractor on board, one of the worst things people can do is have some architect over design a house and then get the plans approved and then bring in a builder who knows nothing about the design. And when really, if they work together or they're the same person, you can really design cost savings into your build. And anytime you have a builder who designed the project or was involved in the design, the build is going to be way smoother, way more efficient, and way more affordable.
What are some of the things that architects do to make builds more expensive? Like meaning like what are some of like the flaws that you would see? Because obviously like if you bring a good contractor, and that's actually a really good tip, they're going to let you know like, hey, look, this design's actually going to be more expensive. If you modify this, it'll be a lot less. What are some of those modifications that you would see?
Every time, great question. So the architect, they're an artist. They're a designer. Like they like architectural features. They like pop outs. They like hips and valleys and covered entries and bay windows and all this stuff that's super expensive. So what I see often is engineers aren't worried about the bottom line most of the time. They're worried about, and this isn't a negative, I don't mean this in a bad way, but a lot of times they're worried about their reputation and their ego and their art, and they want a beautiful, I mean, this is going to be an attachment of them when it's built, and that's part of their legacy. Everything they've designed, when they drive by it or they see a picture of it, they want that, grandiose feeling of that's a really beautiful structure, as they should, as a master of their craft. But they're not as worried about yield. And as investors on this show, we're really looking for a beautiful product, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So I see engineers over design. There's a lot of engineering with the roof systems, which are going to require a lot of expensive hardware, extra inspections, different nailing
Mhm.
schedules. I see them over design kitchens. One of my biggest tips, and probably the most cost savings tip I can give on an ADU, is go with a one wall galley kitchen. You'll save thousands of dollars. Go with a rectangular design. Start with a rectangle. You can get a lot of architectural detail in a rectangle, but every time you deviate from a rectangular shape, say you do an L, say you do an I shape or T shape bump out, every single turn outside of 4 turns in a building is a minimum of $5,000. So they put too much into the roof lines, they put too much contour into the building, and the last piece I would say they do is they over design an ADU for a neighborhood. So if you're in a median price point neighborhood in your market and the average price house is 800,000 and they're fairly simple, say the median price point is 80 in that market, you're not going to want to design an ADU that looks like it should be in Beverly Hills. You're not going to want some custom jewel box in the backyard of what we would call a track home in LA. Even though it's $800,000, it probably is a pretty simple design, pretty simple roof pitch, might have pretty simple siding, might have vinyl sliding windows, not some big fancy wood casement window. So don't over design, and then don't design the finishes that kind of outpace the market you're in.
I love it. I love it. And then as it relates to different types of ADUs, like for example, like prefab, garage conversion, stick build. What are your thoughts on the different types of ADUs and any tips that you would give on either one? Which one is easier to do? Which one's more expensive? Do you recommend prefabs? Do you not recommend prefabs? What's the best way to go about this?
Yeah. Let's just start with the simplest and the most calls I get, which is garage conversions. I get so many calls on garage conversions. I recently bought a property in my market and did a detached garage conversion. I recorded every step of the way on my YouTube channel. You guys can go check it out. I don't love garage conversions, and I'll tell you why. Because one, you're going to lose the spot where you park and store all your stuff. So in California, in Oregon, the state can't require an off-street parking spot for an ADU anymore. That's a beautiful piece of legislation. But a lot of times they will confirm on your plot plan that you can meet the current parking standard for the main house. So a lot of times if you have a main house and you need 2 off-street parking spots, depending on your market, that might be in your garage. So sometimes you can't even use your garage because you have to have it to meet the parking standard for the planning requirement. Garages are also sometimes built on a slope. They almost always have a concrete foundation. When you build a garage, most of the time you don't put a vapor barrier underneath it because it's not going to be gross habitable living space. I like to build and design all my ADUs with these big high lofts. I mean, I'm in an ADU right now that has it's got a 20-foot lofted ceiling. And when you're in a small space, it's really important to have volume. You don't really get that in a garage. A lot of garages have an 8 or 9 foot ceiling, probably has a trussed roof, so you can't do a lot to that. Most of the time, a garage doesn't have a toilet in it, so you're going to have to cut up concrete and take a 3-inch sewer line out to the garage. So those are a few reasons I don't love garage conversions. A few reasons I like them a lot is because most people have them. And as we go into a recessionary cycle and people are trying to create more income, or we're trying to create more housing to offset this crisis, a lot of people do have the option for a garage. Even if it's not an awesome one, it is readily available for most homeowners. So that's what I like about it. Garage conversions are usually about 50 to 75% of the cost of a standalone unit. So if I'm building ADUs in my market for personally for $100 a square foot, I would say a garage conversion would cost me $50 to $75 a square foot. So they are cheaper to convert and build, but a lot of times what we realize is we have to unbuild them. Even though the walls are up and they may even be insulated or drywalled, we have to take most of that down to run water, to run sewer, to run power. So that's the benefit, pro and con of a garage conversion. I would say that in California, the garage conversion is a little bit higher on the scale because that could be your JADU to get the 3 units on one property. So definitely look at it in California. Next up would be the stick-built standalone, which is by far my favorite product, and I'll tell you why. People pay for 3 things. This could be a renter or a homeowner, it doesn't matter. They're going to pay for location, they're going to pay for privacy, and they're going to pay for amenities. So the new standalone ADU is an amazing product because most of your clients that are going to rent that are going to be used to living in multifamily spaces where they have shared wall, people above, beside, below them, maybe all 4, and they're going to have the privacy of their own standalone unit. So you pay a little bit more for a detached cottage style ADU, but the rents that you demand are so much higher. Let's use your example. You've got 25 units in a multifamily zone, and now you're building some sort of configuration of these 5 more. If any of those 5 are detached, what do you think your tenant base is going to want to rent? What's going to be their first choice if they can afford it? They're going to want that ground level detached unit way before they're going to want a shared unit. So that's why I like standalone new detached ADUs. And then the last one is very controversial, and I'm kind of against what most people will give advice for, and that's some kind of prefabricated or modular ADU. Those are my least favorite for a few different reasons. One is they're really hard to get permitted. So we'll use the example of boxable. We've all seen these foldable houses. Elon Musk does not live in one. That's a myth. They're $50,000. They're not. They're not $50,000. In fact, you can't even find one, and they're really hard to get permitted. If you're in an area where somebody has lobbied their city and planning and building department to sign these off, go talk to them and see how many that they've done. Because what I found every single time is that they're not more cost effective. You still need to do all the site work. So you still have to bring water, sewer, power, gas, cable to the site. You still have to pour a perimeter concrete foundation. It still has to be bolted to that to meet International Code Council standards. There's all these different pieces. You have 2 bureaucracies most of the time now. You have to have some kind of on-site underground general that's working with the city on the site work, and then you have this third party who is building these units off-site in Vegas deal with your planning department. I have seen a few of them work in the Bay Area. I will tell you that if you have like an RV park where you have 50 spots and they all have a concrete pad and water, sewer, power hookups are already there, that would be an amazing spot for a prefab ADU. And I'll end it with this on this topic of prefab is there's all these startups, there's these executives leaving major Silicon Valley businesses to go to these startup ADU companies. I mean, the co-host of or the co-founder of Airbnb has got his own company. Go read their reviews. Go to their website and go to the pretty much the richest tech guy in the ADU space. Go read the reviews about what they're saying about their product, and they're taking longer and costing more. So I tell everybody that everybody's trying to come up with this cool new hip design for an ADU when we already have it. We've had them for years. We have a way better product. It's called a manufactured home. They're already pre-approved at the federal level. They have a HUD stamp on them. So your local city in California can't say, no, that doesn't meet requirements. The walls aren't thick enough. You can't get R23 insulation in them. They can't say it needs solar. They can't even say it needs solar in California because it already federally trumps the state law. So I would be calling Clayton Homes or somebody. I mean, Warren Buffett owns Clayton Homes. They've been building manufactured homes for a long time. I would buy a small, trendy looking manufactured home if I wanted to go with that strategy. Another thing that is really disruptive to that space is the site planning. So if you have any grade, a lot of times any slopes at all, those prefabricated spots don't work.
Yeah. What's the difference between a prefab and a manufactured?
Well, it's just going to depend. Some of them, it depends on the definition. A lot of modular would be pretty much complete, where they just show up. You think of a container house, or you think of some of these. There's a few companies that have put a few of them in the Bay Area where they show up and they'll crane it up to 100 feet away and they'll set it down pretty much complete. So that's more of a kind of a modular, or it may come in pieces. And then the prefabricated could be some sort of paneled system. It could be some sort of kit system. I kind of lump them all together as either built off-site or built on-site. And at the end of the day, again, we'll go back to just yield. What does the site work cost? What does the actual, how much does it cost to get me a certificate of occupancy and a set of keys so I can rent it out? And when I look at the time and the money, those never pencil out. The few benefits they do have, and there are benefits, is that you're not making a mess. You're not having all that noise in the backyard.
Mhm.
Your NIMBY neighbors are going to hate you less if they show up and set it up. But most of these companies have YouTube videos of somebody just showing up and setting it up in a day. And then you go and you read tutorials and you read experiences and you read reviews, and it takes multiple weeks to even get it there. It takes multiple weeks to even set it up, and then there's all these problems, and they have to fix it before they can hand you over the keys. And
Mhm.
realistically, if we're looking at a 500 or 600 square foot building, you can build that on site with a 3-person crew in a couple of days.
So I wanted to ask you, like, whenever we were talking about cost, about like stick build or garage conversions, I think you said that you're able to build some of these independent standalones for about $100 a foot. And I think that you said that garage conversions should be anywhere like 75%, like 50 to 75% of that. So like I'm doing some basic math, 1,000 square feet for $100,000. How is that possible, and what would somebody have to do to drive their costs down to keep their costs low? Because obviously I mean, I've got 6 units on an apartment complex, and I've been told that something really good for what we're going to be building is about 250 a foot. So I'm looking at $100, and there's obviously a big difference there. What would you say that somebody would need to do to keep their cost when building relatively low, but still not overcomplicate their life by hiring a wrong contractor or hiring the wrong people? Because obviously that could end up costing a lot more in the long run as well.
Yeah, wonderful. So starting with a very simple, and simple does not mean cheap looking, a very simple design, period.
That's the key.
Start with a very simple design. Don't over design, don't overbuild, don't over finish. Start with a simple design. period. And I will throw the disclaimer out there that I'm a general contractor. I've been building ADUs for 30 years. I've made every mistake you could possibly build that I know of building ADUs. There's still more mistakes I'll make. I just don't know them yet. And it's taken that long to come up with designs and best practices to make these so affordable. So in my market, you know, if you're hiring a contractor to build you a simple ADU, it would be about 225 a square foot for a new build and 125 a square foot for a detached, or excuse me, an attached conversion. So you're $250 a square foot. That's a great price. My $100 a square foot for standalone new builds is because I'm a contractor. I do a lot of the work myself and I fully manage the whole thing. And then the middle answer of this would be super duper simple design, don't overfinish, and then do the project management. You don't have to pick up one hammer or hang one sheet of drywall. If you can manage the project, you'll save about 40%. General contractors make about 40% plus 10% of all money spent. So if you think about that in a build, that's a lot of money you can save. So if you can keep a schedule, if you can make a decision, if you can handle conflict once in a while, you can be a general contractor. So I tell people, keep it simple, manage it yourself if you can, and you know, be in control of costs. The problem is in our industry, to no fault of its own, we have a contractor and subcontractors who are trying to drive costs up so they can feed their family, which is their job. And we have an investor or a developer or a homeowner who's trying to keep it affordable to keep rent down so they can give it to somebody in our workforce and still make money. So those forces are pulling apart. The only way to get rid of that opposing force is to have one point of contact. The investor, homeowner, developer has to also be in charge of the project. So you're working in the same way. Your goals are aligned.
That's awesome. What about utilities? Like, is it better to do ADUs typically have separate electricity, separate gas? Do they typically have separate water? Do you like separate water relative to the other ones? And any best practices as it relates to how to split up the utilities?
Wonderful question. Yes. So one of the reasons why accessory dwelling units are more affordable and they're the most affordable new housing strategy we have is because we can piggyback off of the current infrastructure of the primary house. Now, okay, Dereck, that sounds cool. Just tie in. Well, what it comes down to is it's saving money. So for example, we'll just use sewer and water. So if I tie into the 3-inch or 4-inch sewer lateral from the main house, that's probably a $60 permit and I can run it right out to the ADU. If I tie into the water line, I just go look for it in the yard, we dig it up, or we go under the house and we cut into a 1-inch water line, we put a T and we take it out to the ADU. That's pennies on the dollar. If you want to put in a new water meter, that's out in the right of way at the street. You may have to dig down 8 feet into concrete, cut a sidewalk. The connection fee might be $2,000 or $3,000. The meter itself, which you have to buy from the city, might be $5,000. So what cost you, $100 to have your plumber go put a T in is now costing you $8,000 to put your water meter on. The sewer, the same thing. There's a big sewer main that runs down the middle of the street. Look at where manholes are. Manholes aren't in your yard right by your ADU. They're out in the middle of the right of way. So it's huge costs to tap into the main infrastructure and way less costs to piggyback off the existing infrastructure. Some municipal jurisdictions will make you put in a separate power meter. Very few have I ever seen in the country make you do anything else. Some will make you put in a primary power meter for the house and a secondary meter for the ADU. I don't like to use any public meters for my products. What I do is I use private meters for everything. So I tap in to the existing utilities because it's cheap and easy and I don't have to pay impact fees or dig in the right of way. And then when I take, for example, power, I'll pull power, 200 amp service at the main house. I'll take conduit from the main house out to the ADU, and then I'll put a private meter there, a private digital meter that can be read monthly. They make these that have Bluetooth. You can set them to your phone. You can put a private water meter on, private gas meter, private power meter, just about everything utility you can have, you can put a private meter on. And what that does is it benefits the tenant. So as opposed to having all these shared utilities where you say, hey, I think you're going to use about $300 of power a month because you're never going to, turn the AC off when you leave or whatever it is, you don't have to charge them a flat rate. You can give them exactly what they use. There's a couple rules with utility and exchange commissions federally that you can't charge your tenants more for power than you're being charged. So you have to be careful how you bill back. But again, we want to benefit our tenants, give them a good deal on power, and therefore they can use whatever they need to be comfortable, and they pay for what they use. So I always put private utility meters on my utilities because it's way cheaper than putting public meters on them, and it works the same way.
What is private? Or so you're talking about like a rub system, or not rubs? You're talking about like something that so there's one total meter, but then you have a separate monitor on theirs. You get one utility bill, and then the tenant reimburses you back what you spend, almost like that, right? Okay, great.
Exactly that. Yeah. And I have a great YouTube video called ADU power metering because it's one of the most questions I get asked often is how do you meter the power? ADU power metering on YouTube is just a 3-minute video that kind of explains what I just talked about.
What I was going to ask you, are there certain companies that can help you with that, like the sub metering of the utilities privately, or
On the install or the management of payment?
I would say both.
Okay, so on the install, your plumber would put the private meter on the water and the gas. Your electrician, who's already running the load center, just puts it's a $250 digital meter. They just put one more meter house and they put a digital meter there between where the power comes in and your load center. And then as far as managing the utilities, I have a system that I personally use, but you can use applications. You can buy software for that. Some of these new meters are digitally readable, so you can literally get a Bluetooth signal sent to your phone once a month. The way I currently do it is I manually read all my ADU meters. It takes me a little while once a month to go through all my ADUs and do that, but it really is a benefit to the tenants, and that's why I do it. After years and years of having lots of really highly efficient ADUs in my portfolio, I know about what every single ADU pays in water, power, sewer, gas every month. I could probably at this point convert it to a flat rate and just charge them one fee, but I still like to empower the tenants. So it's so worth it. And that's a huge selling point. If somebody's coming to look at your ADU and you say, hey, this brand new ADU is Energy Star efficient, it's Earth Advantage Platinum, I have all Energy Star appliances, utilities all inclusive on this place are less than $50 and have been for the last 4 years. I'm going to pass that savings on to you. I mean, how much more is that tenant going to want your place when they already love it? So huge benefit.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Cool. And then what about financing for ADUs? Like, let's say that I am a homeowner. I've got equity in my home. I don't really have a lot of liquid cash. What are some of the different ways that you're seeing that homeowners or even investors are going about financing their ADUs?
Great. You started with I have equity in my house. So 9 months ago, I would have said cash out refi all day long, get as much as you can. Today, with primary owner occ, 740 and higher, best loan you can possibly get, being at 7.5 maybe. I wouldn't touch the first you have. If you haven't been asleep the last 3 years, you should have a rate under 4 and hopefully under 3. So you're not going to want to go pull 100 grand out plus the 600 grand you owe on your house to build an ADU. I would look for a second mortgage. That's my favorite strategy right now. Look for some kind of long-term fixed rate, 20 or 30 year if you can find it, fixed rate second. So, say you have an $800,000 house, you've got a note for 700 on it at 3%. Go see if you can just pull the 100 you need at 8 or 9% to build that ADU. So seconds are great from small local banks or credit unions. Go to somebody you already have a relationship with. Again, just like planning and zoning, just like building, just like a contractor, it's a relationship business. Go find long-term fixed rate money. A couple other little side doors into financing an ADU that I tell people to look for is potentially borrowing against your employer-sponsored retirement account. So a lot of plans, check with your plan, but will let you borrow 50% up to $50,000 from your 401k or 403b, and you can pay yourself back over 60 months with interest. So that's a good option. The financial stack is wherever you can get the money. Another good one is a private money loan from a family member. And as long as you follow the IRS applicable federal rate, you can get money from a family member that doesn't count as a gift. And the lowest rate possible it's in the 2s right now. So an applicable federal rate loan from a family member is another awesome strategy. I wouldn't recommend hard money in most cases unless you're very experienced. I wouldn't recommend ARM money. I wouldn't go build an ADU on a HELOC that, maybe had a 4% ceiling or 4% floor, 18% ceiling last year, but right now is at 6 or 7% if you're looking at Wall Street Prime. So be very, very, very careful with adjustable rate or short-term debt would be my biggest takeaways. And if you have equity, you're going to have to look at, probably a second as your best option. If you're in California and you're in the North State, I would definitely be building a relationship with Redwood Credit Union. They have the best ADU build product I've seen in the country. They have a 90/10, I believe it's a 90/10 LTV loan on an unbuilt ADU. So you have to jump through some hoops. You need a professional builder in that area that will give you a budget sheet. You need a set of plans. You have to have them pre-approved from your city. But if somebody comes to you with pre-approved set of plans and they already have a builder who's licensed in their state, you could go to that bank and they will give you 90% LTV on after build value of that. And there's actually some California grant money where they will actually cover the bridge while you're taking those draws to build it. And then, the kicker, and this is a bummer today, if you're listening, it's November of 22, but you're going to have to refi out of that a lot of times when you're done. There's also some construction. Where rate's going to be in a year when that ADU is done, I would say higher than they are now, but not much. But that's a guess. They could be back at 3. I mean, who knows? But the point being here is that's a great option, and they only offer it in certain counties in California. But anybody who's listening and wants to look into that strategy, I would call that credit union because they have the gold standard ADU loan. And then the other couple would be like 203K loans, home renovation loans, home equity, line of credit that is fixed, that goes into improvements of the primary house. So if you live there and you pull a HELOC and you can get it fixed, you can write off all that interest because it's going to improve the primary home. So there's little nuances. I don't want to be too general, but talk to your lender. And if you don't like what your lender tells you, call another lender. I mean, that's how you and I met. Like you were looking for, second finance. You were asking financing questions on ADUs, and it's like, this is who I use. He's the smartest guy in the country that I've ever met. Call him. If he doesn't have what you want, call her. Just keep calling. Like banks are not created equally, especially when you get outside of the QM, the qualified mortgage space. You start looking at, portfolio loans from small local banks and credit unions. They will make terms that work for your ADU if you have a relationship with them.
I love it.
Sorry to
I
get so
love it.
long on
Cool.
that one. I always get super passionate about the finance piece. Sorry.
No, I think it's important because I think that's kind of what holds up a lot of people. But I see tremendous power in these ADUs because I mean rents are pretty high now, and the financing, the costs relative to what it would cost, what you would have to spend to buy something, like you have the ability, like in our area, this is the way I look at it. Like, let's say I'm building an ADU right now on a 2-car garage for $75,000. That 2-car garage has the potential to bring in, for $75,000 invested, approximately $2,000 a month in rent. So it's like, where else could I invest $75,000 and get $2,000 in residual every single month? Not only that, but if you get even more creative, like for that garage conversion, I could actually do Airbnb. So instead of 2,000, it could be 4,000 for 75,000. So the return on investment is insane. What I did want to ask you though is I wanted to ask you, like, what are some of the biggest challenges or obstacles that you kind of see, or even mistakes that you see people do while going this ADU route? Like, what would you recommend against, and any final tips that you think would be helpful for our viewers?
Yeah. So the number one mistake, period, is people over design and overbuild their ADU. They build it too fancy, they use too nice of finishes, and they make it too big every time. Like that's the biggest mistake. My area will let me build 1,000 square foot ADU. I'm building 1,000 square foot ADU, and really, bigger is not better. I mean, in my market, my ideal tenant is a nurse or a teacher. They want one room. They live alone. They're a working professional, and my units are 400 to 600 square feet. And I build them for half the price as I would 1,000 square foot. So don't build it too big. Don't use too nice of finishes. Don't over design it. That's by far the biggest mistake. And what you had just said, you're looking at a 2.25% rule. Like everybody can't meet the 1% rule. Build it yourself. You're meeting the 2.25% rule. That's without leverage. And what people forget is it's not just your return on investment. You have a brand new high efficiency unit that's in super high demand and low supply. So not only is it twice the return of anything else, it's also a brand new unit where you're going to demand the best tenant. So the strategy is amazing. Don't over design, don't overbuild, keep a super simple layout. I'll give you some of my tricks when I'm designing. One wall galley kitchen. You want to have in-unit washer and dryer. You want to have a vaulted ceiling, so even though your space is small, it feels really big. Don't skimp out on the nice finishes like real hardwood floors, stone countertops, quartz countertops, stainless steel appliances. I see so many people, they build a $150,000 ADU and then they skimp out at the end and they put, cheap sheet vinyl down and Formica tops. And it's like, no, 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 no. That's the only thing that your end user is going to see and touch. Make it super nice. So yeah, don't over design it. Some other challenges that I have seen come up is, again, it's a relationship business. It's how your neighbor is going to treat you. Even if it's an investment property, how people perceive you and your project. You have to have thick skin, because I'm sorry, call it NIMBYism, call it people don't like change. When you're building something new in a neighborhood that's primarily been reserved for single family houses, people aren't going to like it. And this is the hero's journey of building an ADU. They see what you're doing. They say you can't do that. They call the city. They find out you can. And then a few months into it, they're glaring at you over the fence. And then when you're done, they want to see it. And then 3 to 6 months later, they call you and ask you if you would help them do their own. Every time.
That's funny. That's funny, but true. Great. So I know that you offer different services, and I know that you offer consultations. Do you mind kind of sharing with our viewers a little bit about the services that you offer in case any of them want to reach out to you personally, and also where people can find you as well too if they saw value with this interview?
Oh, awesome. Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, my goal is to influence 1 million ADUs in my lifetime. I plan to live a really long time, but you can find me at thataduguy.com. Thataduguy.com is my website. It's kind of my landing page. That ADU guy on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. Instagram and YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, anywhere, that ADU guy. But my services are, I do private consultations with mostly builders and developers and investors all over the country on how to build ADUs affordably. And with my background of planning, designing, financing, building, and holding, we look at the whole process. It's not just like, here's how you save money. It's like, here's how you write the lease when you're done. This is your criteria, stuff like that. So I work with people. Most of the people I work with are 1 hour calls or maybe 2 1 hour calls. So you don't need a lot of time with me. I tell people I charge you hundreds to save you thousands. If you don't feel like you received your value from me, I'll refund your money. And I have this really cool sliding scale. So I grew up poor with a single mom, moved around apartment to apartment my whole life. Housing is personal to me. Like, I really, like, this is my life's work. And so I work with first-time home buyers for free. First-time buyers for free. You call me, we'll talk about your criteria, we'll talk about your market. I'll help you try to design a buy box of what you need to be looking for. If you're a homeowner, I have a rate for you. And then if you're an investor, I have a rate that's double the homeowner rate. So I have this kind of socialistic sliding scale. A lot of the work I do is for free. ADUs pay my way. So I've built and hold ADUs for a long time. I've never sold a house. So that income allows me to live the simple life where I can run and ski. So the consultation work is really just a labor of love. I'm not getting rich here, but you can book a call with me at thataduguy.com. You can look at what I'm doing on my YouTube channel. I'm open sourcing all my builds. I post pretty much everything I can to try to help people. My phone number is on my website, and I'll tell you this, if you call me, just be ready to take action. People call me all the time and they say, Dereck, I didn't think you were going to answer, and they have nothing to ask. So let's not waste each other's time. If you're ready to take action and you need my help, please reach out. I love, being able to share my story again with first-time home buyers. So if you're a first-time home buyer and you want to break into the market and you need to help offset these high mortgage prices, like, I will help you get on the property ladder for free.
Perfect. Great. All right. Well, for all of our viewers, we had Dereck Sherrel. He talked to us about how to build ADUs. We talked about the law, requirement, costs, grants, junior ADUs, how to identify properties. I just want to say thank you to Dereck. The last thing, if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you feel that this episode would be helpful to either a friend, a neighbor, a family member, make sure to hit that share button and send it to them. So once again, Jose Luis Morales, host of the Morales Real Estate Group Show podcast, Dereck Sherrel, that ADU guy. Thank you so much, Dereck. Look forward to having you on again in the future.